Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who've joined us from different parts of the world. Welcome to day three of TIE Global Summit 2020, world's largest virtual global summit for the entrepreneurs by the entrepreneurs. The summit boasts of 40,000 plus registrations, 350 plus speakers, 500 plus one-on-one sessions, 135 plus leading companies, and 20,000 plus startups. Before we begin day three, this is a reminder for all the full access participants to log on to matchmaking software, complete your profile, and schedule your meetings with fellow participants. The AI powered matchmaking engine will recommend you suitable attendees to schedule your meetings. Now, moving on to today's first session. The discussion point is the challenges and answers to cross border investments from the experts. We have Vinay Bansal, who is the CEO at Inflection Point Ventures, an early stage angel investing platform. He's a finance professional and has been a turnaround specialist with 20 plus years of experience across Fortune 50 companies, private equity, and startups. Over to you, Vinay.
Thanks a lot, Gunjan. Appreciate it. And a very good morning, good evening to everybody as well. So let me introduce my panel here on cross-border scaling. I have Praveen Akiraju. He's the Managing Director at Insight Partners based in San Francisco Bay Area. He brings in a lot of product and operational lens to investing and investing in passionate entrepreneurs. He seeks to challenge the status quo in the areas of automation, data platforms, DevOps, and infrastructure software. Praveen has spent the early part of his career working on his own, building products and scaling engineering teams while building world-class platforms in highly competitive segments. CEO of VCE and Viptela, Praveen has lived through the experience of navigating startups through the product strategy, team building, go-to-market, and scaling required to build $100 million plus businesses. Prior to Insight, Praveen served as a managing partner at SoftBank Vision Fund, where he led the enterprise and SaaS investment practice. His investments include Automation Anywhere, Team8, Startup Foundry, where he currently serves as board advisor. Praveen holds MS degree in electrical engineering and an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. Welcome, Praveen, to the forum.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Next we have is Arjun Reddy. He's the founder of FalconX and also the founder and former CEO of Sierra Atlantic that he founded and grew for 17 years as a best-in-class global services company before being acquired by Hitachi. Previously, Raju spent 10 years at Intel and enjoys working with young entrepreneurs and mentoring them to build great global companies. Raju currently serves as the board of Boeing at Belong, Grey Orange, HealthCube, and Sector, and previously at Redbus, which was acquired by Naspers, Espresso Logic, now CA, Hitachi Payments, and Cognivision, now Intel. Raju is currently a board member of RAND Corporation, Center for Asia Pacific Policy, FalconX, and Enacte Arts. He previously served as the chairman of BITS AA International, the alumni body of BITS Pilani. Raju is also the co-founder of Kakatiya Sandbox, an initiative in rural Telangana, building an ecosystem for long-term positive social impact. He's also an active TIE Silicon Valley charter member and served as a convener for TICON 2016. Welcome, Raju. Great to be talking to you.
Thank you, Vinay. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So let me just get started with the more macro view here, and let me kind of point it to you, Praveen, and Raju. Please feel free to jump in. Is how do you think the market's looking like right now? Both in India and in the US, and the general investment climate, Praveen.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. A great time to be dreaming of building great products and companies. I think if you look at the point in time that we're in, one of the things that's very profound is the rate of change that we see today, right? Whether it's technology, whether it's business models, whether it's consumption behaviors, the rate of change has dramatically accelerated. And this is even before COVID fundamentally moved the entire economy online. So I think what you're seeing right now for entrepreneurs is this sort of unique window of opportunity where they're able to build companies and products that challenge the status quo, and a customer base that's willing to accept products from startups and try new things. So you combine that with the other part of the puzzle, which is the tremendous availability of capital in the markets today. Because every government out there has cut interest rates, every federal bank, every central bank has cut interest rates. The supply of money in the marketplace right now has increased dramatically at tremendously low interest rates. So what that means again is this: for all these entrepreneurs who have these great ideas, who are looking to challenge the status quo, there is an abundance of capital that is chasing great ideas and great entrepreneurs. So when you combine these two, I think what you're seeing is this dramatic explosion of companies that are being founded, whether it's in India, whether it's in the United States or other markets like Israel or in Europe. And I think the connectedness of these ecosystems has allowed companies in India to be able to build large, profitable customer bases globally, right? And be able to sort of build in India for the world. Uh, at the same time, the Indian market itself has evolved significantly in terms of sophistication, in terms of infrastructure, from a mobile perspective, that is allowing sort of companies to build large scale unicorns that are focused on India markets, in addition to Indian companies that are focused on global markets. So I think we're truly fortunate to be at this juncture in time where there's so much opportunity, so much kind of willingness to be able to fund those opportunities and ideas, and a marketplace that's open.
Oh, thanks, Praveen. I think some great points. Raju, I'll come to you for your thoughts as well.
Yeah. So, by the way, just delighted to be here, and thank you, Thai Global, for setting this up. Yeah, I, I, in early spring and maybe early summer, there was definitely a lot of anxiety in the capital markets and the VC industry, angel community, and all of that, right? The startups, no question about it. But things have really turned around so rapidly. I mean, today I was just looking at an article in Economist that said, you know, companies have raised more capital in 2020 than ever before. I mean, this is across the spectrum, of course, public and private, some $3.6 trillion. I mean, that's a huge, huge amount of capital, right? Partly back to what Praveen was talking about, how governments have sort of, uh, uh, created a lot of, whatever capital that they've released into the market. And so I think that's a big part of it. And of course, just today, given a lot of our audience here is in the tech community, just today, DoorDash went public at what, about 35, 40 billion, something like that, and closed at 70,
Yeah.
74 billion. It's crazy. Just the kind of, I think the appetite for, some of these startups going public now, which essentially that now feeds a bunch of other, there are a bunch of people who have liquidity, both the funds as well as the angel investors, right? And that capital again flows back into the startup. So I think it's a super exciting time. Now, specifically from the standpoint of the India, entrepreneurs who are building products for a global market, like Praveen was referring to, I believe the Indian entrepreneurs are kind of in a unique position, essentially to combine the best of both China and Israel. Which means China with the access to large domestic market, which India has, so you can build your products, validate them early on, and hone them before you take it to global markets. And Israel, you could argue, is probably built the most vibrant ecosystem for product companies for a global market, right? Outside of Silicon Valley, and I think you're starting to see that the trend. Just even if you look back, just in the last 12 months. It's amazing the kind of attention that's now these Indian entrepreneurs are starting to draw attention. You see articles in TechCrunch and the kind of publication that you rarely had some of these companies covered. So it's a very exciting time. There's certainly plenty of capital out there, both at the angel level as well as the venture community.
No, I think very well said, Raju. And I think if I combine, what Praveen said of low interest rates leading to a kind of abundance of capital. And then these ecosystems in India, Israel, kind of vying for that capital. What do you think, Raju? Is the attractiveness therefore of Indian startups to attract that capital, right? What are those factors that are involved in kind of making sure that Indian startups are attractive?
Yeah, when you say Indian startups, you mean startups focused on domestic market, or it could be both?
It could be both. Basically
Okay,
founders
sure.
coming from India and kind of setting up shop in
Yeah,
India.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I think in some ways all the big venture firms now, they've had offices in India for a while, and just about I think all the top VC firms, and certainly Praveen can sort of talk about that more, uh, have serious attention now that they're paying to the Indian entrepreneurs, right? Because the quality of the entrepreneurs is just as good as any of the ones that I see in Silicon Valley, frankly. Just amazing, and they're starting very early. I mean, I'm more active as an angel investor. I don't manage a fund or anything, but I'm an LP in a bunch of venture funds that invest in cross-border as well as local here in Silicon Valley. It's just crazy to think of some of the companies. The last one that I invested in, the entrepreneur just came out of this is the Bitspilani ecosystem, where we have a program focused on nurturing entrepreneurs within that. Right, he's building this space tech company. And just 3 months after graduation, a company called Pixel that was in the news, right? So I think when you look at that quality of entrepreneurs, it's extraordinary. And one thing that has happened, it hasn't been talked about much in the press or in other circles in general. It's the power of relatable role models, right? Now there are enough of them who have gone on to build companies of some very good scale, whether it is companies like Freshworks or Zoho or Grey Orange or Postman. I mean, you can go down that list. There are quite a few of these entrepreneurs. Again, these are all in sort of the India to global product category, right? Now there are clearly the ones focused on domestic market. You have what about over 30, I think, unicorns today in India. So I think the power of these relatable role models is extremely important. Uh, just back to my own journey as an entrepreneur, back in the early 90s, when I decided to leave my job at Intel and start a company, I saw people like Kanwal Rekhi, who, I was fortunate to attract him as my board member and mentor in many ways. When I saw people like Kanwal Rekhi or Desh Deshpande, I said, hey, these guys can do, why not me, right? There is that confidence that comes from that. And, just the sheer number of, sheer population size in India is so large. And when you have a few of these role models that they can relate to, I think it's one of those things that will sort of grow very rapidly. So I'm very enthusiastic about the entrepreneurs, and the markets are certainly there, both in India, but certainly in the global markets. Yeah.
Sure, no, that's a great point. A few role models, breeding a few more, and then it kind of has a spiraling effect. So, Praveen, what do you think? How can Indian startups be attractive? And maybe also talk a little bit more about what Raju said. How can we actually create large startups from India, or maybe even focused in India? Couple of names that Raju took. Maybe you can add a few more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I was fortunate enough to be involved with sort of India's journey of from the beginning, early days of the internet, all the way through the current phase. And it's an amazing journey, right? In many ways, I think I still remember, in the late '90s, we were building ERNet, which was the first Indian internet with BSNL. I think we just celebrated like 25 years of that event over LinkedIn the other day. And so I've had the opportunity to work with engineers, bright engineers out of India for a long time. Cisco, I was part of the initial team that opened the Cisco office in Bangalore, right? um, and one of the things we always felt in the early days was that the quality of engineering talent in India was always exceptional, right? You can see it today, not just in India but globally. The challenge always was the lack of sort of understanding of markets. In a classic sort of startup, so you have the engineer who's the technical sort of brains of the operation, and you have the product guy, right? Person who can translate the customer requirement into product requirements. And so what often happened in India was that that product component was missing, right? So we'd have great engineers, but because they didn't have that piece, it was like they had a single window to look out of the world, right? Which was what was presented to them. I think what has changed over the last decade or so is that one, thanks to the BPO revolution, a lot of Indian engineers got to go out into the world and work on, companies, everything from Volvo in Sweden to General Electric to China to Japan, everywhere, right? So they brought all of that back to India. So they understand the essence of the global economy and the companies in the global economy at a very fine granular level, right? And secondly, I think with the advent of internet and all these forums and meetups that happen online, it's essentially normalized the information flow or the awareness of problems, right, to amongst engineers, whether you're in the US or in India. I think we talk about sort of COVID now starting this revolution of distributed workforces and people working from home. I mean, honestly, we have been working with teams out of India, engineering teams out of India for 20 years, right? It's not new. I think what's new is that the awareness of the problem space has now been widely kind of distributed because of the fact that people share all of their views online, right? So you see open source projects coming out of India, some phenomenal companies. Postman is one that Insight recently invested in at a $2 billion valuation, right? That's a company that was incubated out of India by Nexus Ventures, my good friend Jishnu Bhattacharjee, right? And they moved to the US, and they're one of the hottest companies in the DevOps space. They're building this amazing platform around API gateways and an API platform. Similarly, another entrepreneur that's sort of amazing is Abhinav Shashank at Innovacer, right? So these guys, it came out of Gurgaon. They're building this sort of healthcare data platform that essentially is taking on an incredibly challenging problem of how do you bring together all the relevant data in the healthcare ecosystem, from patients, doctors, pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, onto one data platform that can then build applications on. So, these are two examples, and I think Raju mentioned Freshworks, and Girish is somebody who's truly, I think, created sort of a brand new go-to-market ecosystem out of India, bottoms up sales to SMB, which I think is a template for a lot of startups that are now being built out of India for the global market. So you have these sort of great examples, and I think it all starts with that combination of great engineering talent and a fine-grained understanding of the problem space, right? Both, Abhinav incidentally, both the founders are named Abhinav. Abhinav at Postman and Abhinav at Innovator, right? Both of them, as well as Girish, essentially started with that understanding. They were able to, because, a journey of a company, as Raju will tell you, right, having founded and built a company, is not a straight line, right? You don't start with an idea and finish with that same idea. You have to basically go where the daylight is. And in order for you to do that, you have to be very closely mapped to how the customer thinks. And I think that's really what has fundamentally changed. And I think that's why you're seeing all this capital flowing into India and these sort of, amazing companies being built out of India.
Thanks, Praveen. On a lighter note, I think I'll rename myself as Abhinav and come to you.
I'm sure we all know a few, 10 or so Abhinavs, all of them, built amazing companies.
Awesome. No, I think the point that you made that, Indian engineers got a chance to go out. And I think just thinking straight, just in terms of coding to understanding the problems and then, kind of bringing them together is a great strategic mindset. I think that Indians are starting to get now versus, being in Infosys or in TCS and trying to, kind of solve problems which are given to them. And I think I myself have been a beneficiary, worked for GE globally more than 10 years. So no, great. I think segue to my next question to Raju here. Raju, Praveen talked about Postman and Innovator, etc. Any thoughts from you on global unicorns coming from India? What do they really embody to you, and how do you look at them?
Yeah. So I think one thing that has also happened here in Silicon Valley, right? There have been quite a few initiatives. I mean, there's a startup bridge. I don't know how many people heard about the startup bridge India that recently came out of the Thai Silicon Valley chapter, initiative early on about 5, 6 years ago. In fact, Innovator was one of the companies in that, and so uh, there are every year we had like some 20, 25 companies, startups from India, and the idea was there was while there was a lot of capital that went into these startups, in terms of liquidity, it was very, very tiny, right? Especially compared to startup ecosystems like Israel and others. And then we invited the top 50 or 75 enterprise companies, basically their the strategic development teams within that, from Salesforce and Facebook and Google and all these companies. And this is a forum that we had at Stanford about 3, 4 years in a row, and there were like about 7 or 8 acquisitions that came out of that within about 2 or 3 years, right? So, and of course, there's a more recent initiative that both Praveen and I are involved with called Falcon X, which the entire focus is on nurturing these great global entrepreneurs. So, while Silicon Valley will continue to be sort of the center of innovation for for the foreseeable future, there are significant sort of startup ecosystems that are forming and have been pretty active now for a while around the world. So our idea is to for these companies at some point in their growth, we found whether it is Postman or Innovator or Gray Orange, another company. I know Vinay, you're also familiar with. Yeah. In all these cases, one of the co-founders, more often than not the CEO, actually relocates here to the US, right? And because that's been a very important part of the transition. You have to be close to the market, and unless you really spend the time, and it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley, but I think there are significant advantages to having that in Silicon Valley compared to other places. In the case of Gray Orange, it's in Atlanta. So I think initiatives like Falcon X, forums like that, and entrepreneurs moving here, those are a very important part of sort of what I've seen. The other thing I would say in general, product management is one, maybe it's a bit of a Silicon Valley bias, but I believe that is best done out of Silicon Valley, because you're in a space that things are very dynamic, right? The technology, everything changes so rapidly. And here, granted now, of course, all of us are operating remotely, but you can't, there is no substitute to that sort of face-to-face interaction at some point, you can't continue to build startups on Zoom, right? And so I think that interchange of ideas, that interaction is extremely important. Product management more than any, I would say. That's what I've noticed with a lot of these companies. They seem to benefit when they have that out of this area. So, I mean, those are some of the things I can think about. But, once again, it's a quality. At the end of the day, it's really about the entrepreneur, and, just that quality of the entrepreneurs just seems to be, getting so rich. And it's not just some, whatever, an e-commerce application or something. There's really some deep tech companies, right? There's Gray Orange or Pixel. Just think about the, or HealthCube, another company, I'm familiar with out of India, out of Bangalore. Just extraordinary, the kind of technology that goes into some of these companies.
No, thanks, Raju. I think some really good names as well. And I think there are a few questions coming from audience on the same topic, but let me come back to you with that. But before that, let me ask, one last one to both of you. And both of you spoke about, let's say Gray Orange, where Samay moved to Atlanta versus a BharatPe, where Ashneer has stayed here. How do you really build, Praveen, a great startup for the globe? And, Raju, you talked about most great culture at Silicon Valley. How is it that culture can be brought to India as well? So maybe, around these two topics, and then we'll move over to the question from the audience.
Yeah, I think, if you think about sort of the culture of Silicon Valley, right? That culture actually started with the great companies that were built here, like HP, like Intel that Raju, came from, right? Like Cisco, where I spent a lot of my formative years. And so what these companies really focused on was, in addition to building great products, is sort of that, so a couple of fundamental tenets of how you build successful businesses, right? That laser focus on customers, right? The ability for you to be able to hire the best and the brightest for the job, right? Irrespective of where they are, and sort of how they come to those positions, right? The focus on team and culture and and development of leadership and being empowering people to be able to step up and challenge the status quo even within the company. These are all sort of things that we learned from great leaders that we work for, right? Which we then bring into startups. So, the ecosystem of the Valley is what it is. Yes, I mean, there's Stanford and there's a lot of capital, but more than that, I think it's the sort of factories. Today, it's Google and Facebook, right? And Uber and VMware, which are kind of churning out these engineers who have gone into a great organization, looked at how great leaders, build great products and scale, come out and replicate that, right? And as these companies grow, then the next crop of engineers from those companies go on to found companies, right? So I think in India, what you saw is the tremendous sort of success of the BPOs and the discipline that they enforce. Because when you are working on a project, in the UK, you have tight timelines, right? You have to work to world-class standards. I think that world-class mentality started to kind of come into a lot of the companies that started to get founded, right? And also now you see, like in Hyderabad, you have Google and Microsoft and Amazon, right? In Bangalore, you have Cisco and a bunch of other companies who have headquarters there. So engineers see that, they join those companies, they see the culture, they see the focus, they learn the right values, and I think they're able to kind of come out and embody those as they build their companies. I think one thing that has happened in the last few years, in the past, I still remember, like a decade ago, in the early 2000s, you had distinct cultures. So there was like a Silicon Valley culture, like the India teams had their own culture. If you go to Europe or Ireland, you had their own culture there. Just what they care about, how they think about things. I'm sure Raju would have a point on this as well, but today it's all normalized, right? An engineer in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai or Pune or wherever has the exact same expectations and exact same sort of aspirations as an engineer in Tel Aviv or the Valley or in Ireland, Cork, or where have you. So I think that's because of the fact that communication is a lot more intense. You have a lot more forums, right? Your Slack channels, and I think that has created this normalization where I don't today honestly see a lot of difference in mindset of founders or engineers in India from what I see in the Valley. I mean, there's still some regional, you know, uh, differences, obviously, right? And specializations based on kind of uh, the specific kind of topic or area of focus in all these different geographies. But culturally, I think there's sort of this normalization that's happening, which I think is great, which I think is what allows you to build world-class companies and deliver world-class software products.
Thanks a lot, Praveen. Let me come to you, Raju, and I think there's a question from the audience as well on this item. He's asking, why is that, we see global companies come out of US, though founded by people of different origins. So something, that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this also connects with the earlier question you were asking me about the culture, right? But one important aspect of I think the Silicon Valley culture that you refer to is this sort of mentor-mentee relationships, right? Mentoring is a two-way street. It's not like I'm parting with some great wisdom when I work with one of these entrepreneurs, right? More often than not, I'm gaining much more. Uh, and I think that's sort of so ingrained in Silicon Valley, you don't even think about it. And clearly, there is an advantage that now there's a large supply of people, of who have actually built companies of substantial scale in Silicon Valley companies, right? That combined with the mindset of sort of sharing, continuing to learn by engaging with other entrepreneurs, I think is a very, very big part of it. So I would say it is starting to happen in India. I mean, there are certainly, a lot of entrepreneurs who have now built companies. I mean, like one of the founders of Gainsight, Sridhar, out of Hyderabad, right? He's now doing his new startup, GTM Buddy, and so entrepreneurs like that who probably not as they're somewhat silent and not as talked about, but we are starting to create that sort of a mass of people within India. And I think even this sense of sharing and sort of I certainly see that. I know in my own alumni community, in the BITS alumni, Samay and Akash, both the founders of Grey Orange, have spent countless hours with a lot of other young entrepreneurs, and I see that spirit spreading. So, and the other thing, just over the years, I've found is for startup entrepreneurs, there are a couple of areas where whether it is in India or in Silicon Valley, I see a gap, maybe a little bit more in India, is sort of having the right board, right? It's really important to have at least one or two people on your board who have built companies and who've been sort of part of a serious startup experience, because you need that empathy for the entrepreneur. I know there are two of you VCs here, but my friend Praveen, of course, he's been an entrepreneur and an exec and a VC, so someone like him would be a perfect board member, right? If you can attract him to your board. So I think that's very important. The other one is, more often than not, I see that they underestimate the importance of a good CFO by the time they get to that, it's often a little bit too late, and of course you can correct it if you're in the right market and the right product, but those are two areas in general I found, entrepreneurs probably need to take a closer look. But I think the most important thing is really having this sort of a culture of giving and sharing, the mentor-mentee networks. And TIE is a wonderful forum, really, that facilitates a lot of that, right?
Thanks, Raju. I know we have about 7 minutes left, so let me come to last one or two questions from the audience. So I'll point this to you, Praveen, first. How does the size of capital requirement change to build a company with the same metrics, but in different countries? So, for example, capital requirement in India will be different than in the US, etc.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think historically speaking, and maybe not historically, but if you talk to me about this last year, 2019, if you're building a Valley company, right, you better be raising significant amounts of capital, even for you to get to like a minimal viable product or product market fit, right? You probably need to be raising in the order of 5 to 10 million or so to get the ball rolling at a minimum, just to hire engineers if you are sort of building out of the Valley. And traditionally it's been obviously cheaper to do that in India, just because of the economics and the way they work out. I think what's happening now is that because we've all now gotten used to COVID and now it's become the norm, and more importantly, I think investors are a lot more comfortable with distributed companies, right? I think, if you look at the companies we've talked about here, whether it's Postman or Grey Orange or Innovacer or even Freshworks, they all sort of started off with a hybrid model. Started with India, they have a team here, very focused on specific things. I think the big thing about building these kind of diverse teams is that you need to really you need to have specific functions for the teams that are located in different geographies. So, if you're just building a product, it's totally, and if you're an entrepreneur out of India, there's no reason why you need to, necessarily hire people in the US unless you feel like there's a specific skill set that you don't have access to, right? So take advantage of that. And I think there's probably an order of magnitude difference in capital requirements to get a company off the ground in India versus the US. So, but if there are specific functions, if you're looking for data engineers or data scientists, for example, where there's a concentration of those type of skill sets here in the Valley, right? Maybe that's the right way to do it. But if you're looking for a DevOps engineer or an application engineer, you probably have equally great talent that you have access to India, with whom you can work with in a much more economical fashion. And then, as the company scales, right, and as the sort of business kind of dictates, you can then raise the next round of capital and expand. So I think they have a lot of options in terms of where you build it based on your capital constraints.
Thanks, Praveen. I think that's exactly what I see. I see an order of magnitude of 3 to 5x kind of a difference. What 5 to 10 mil in the Valley is about 1 to 2 mil kind of in India. And I think what you also spoke about, let's say Semi-Kohli at Grey Orange, first built in India and then moved to the US. Right? I think that's a very good hybrid model. So any last thoughts from you, Raju, as well, before we kind of take this session to closure?
Yeah, just I was in a session late last year that this is a China Economic Forum here locally in the Bay Area, and the Sequoia partner for China made a comment which is kind of interesting. I thought he said, as big as some of these startups have been from China in the B2B enterprise space, there have been just 4 companies that have reached a unicorn status, right? I mean, that's one measure of, success, but just 4. I was actually startled to hear that number is that small. In the US, produced roughly about 100 of them in the last 10 years, right? So roughly about 10 per year. Now, India, if you think about it, we've talked about quite a few names. Many of them are, almost all of them are already unicorn. And you guys might have a better data on this, but my sense is that at least 6, maybe 10 companies somewhere in that neighborhood today already past $1 billion enterprise value. I'm talking about primarily B2B enterprise startups, right? And there may be another 10 to 15 that can get there over the next 4 or 5 years. So I mean, this is we often talk about China is, but heck no, in the B2B startups, Indian entrepreneurs are doing amazingly well. And I think that trend is just going to accelerate big time in the next 4 or 5 years. So it's very exciting time. And, a forum like TIE obviously is a very important sort of a catalyst, a platform to enable that.
Absolutely, Raju. I mean, I think last quarter only I was talking to the founders of Razorpay. And, they achieved unicorn status as well. Some really good work that's happening out here. So I guess,
and it's not all urban India, by the way. Just I wanted to say, in the context of Thai, I mean, I'm particularly. I know you talked about some of the things that I'm involved in. This is more on the rural India in Telangana, but this little town called Nizamabad is probably the smallest Thai chapter there is, 6 lakh population, and a very vibrant, active Thai chapter, mostly run by all in their 20s, early 30s, and almost all non-tech people. So that's also obviously a very important part of the entrepreneur sort of ecosystem, right? So it is exciting, and it's not just urban India, but when you see these entrepreneurs coming out of these small towns, I think that's where the real future is.
Awesome, Raju. I think you ended the note very well. Right from a small town in Telangana to the Silicon Valley, it's a full spectrum of real global scaling. So I guess with that, we are coming to the end of the time as well. I think practically, dot on time. So I appreciate both Praveen and Raju, you being here and kind of handed.
Thank you for moderating it so well. And thank you, Raju.